Hello again and welcome to today's video. The topic that we're going to cover briefly today is one that relates to the idea of offering loving kindness to those things within us which we usually prefer to try and avoid or to push away or to avert from. Now, the reality of the situation is this, which is that all of us, to a certain degree, have some traits, some parts of ourselves, perhaps some more than others, known or unknown, that we do not like. There are behaviours that come up from time to time which we would rather they didn't. There are responses that we give to other people that are perhaps impatient or harsh in their tone, or angry or jealous or whatever it might be that appear. And there are also lots of internal sensations that we might feel as a result of some of these narratives that we hold to be true about ourselves. For example, we may experience anxiety, we may experience sadness, we may experience depression, we may experience feeling low or lethargic or confused or alone, lonely or despairing. There are so many of these, and if we're truly honest with ourselves, not because we are trying to indulge ourselves and not because we are trying to make excuses perhaps for the way in which we are in any given moment of time, but simply on a voyage, on a journey to know ourselves better. If we truly reflect, we can come to know of many, many aspects of the way that we are that at some level we are in resistance to and that we don't accept, and that we would rather that they would not be a part of what we are. Now, typically, again, encouraged by our modern culture that we live in, that we imbibe, that we are to a certain degree indoctrinated by, the usual response to things that we don't like is that we try to push them away. We try to create distance between ourselves and them. We try to avert from them, and at the same time, we try to distract ourselves from their presence. Now, as a result of this, what happens is that we are essentially shunning away and pushing into touch, if you like, or suppressing these behaviours which are as much a part of ourselves as the things that we might deem to be beneficial or joyous or good. Now, the more that we try to suppress or run away from a particular behaviour or a particular energy, we actually give more energy to that behaviour, more energy to that thought pattern than if we are able to bring it into our awareness and to sit with it. And I've talked about this in previous videos, the idea of having the ability to cultivate resilience to sitting with that which is difficult. So as we begin to sit and as we begin to notice the areas of ourselves that we judge to be things that we would rather disappear or go away, we can notice actually that we bring a huge amount of judgment to those behaviors. And we also bring a huge amount of energy to ourselves trying to avoid those behaviors and trying to push them away. So the question becomes, well, what is an alternative approach to doing that, which clearly doesn't seem to work? At least it hasn't worked for me in all the years that I've tried to suppress and push away these particular traits. In the yogic text, there's a lot of talk about compassion. There's a lot of talk about kindness. There's a lot of talk about non-violence and truthfulness. And the reason for this is that we should not forget that these are not just things that we want to practice externally, but these are actually very, very useful states to practice in terms of holding the things and sitting with the aspects of ourselves which we judge to be disadvantageous or things that don't seem to be helping us in our relationships or our lives in general. But what yoga teaches us actually is that we should try to look at ourselves holistically, and rather than creating more barriers within ourselves which actually cause further patterns to arise, which cause more tension and the potential for more of these behaviors to burst from underneath the surface, but actually to see if we can sit with those behaviors, sit with those feelings, and sit with those sensations with an attitude of offering them loving kindness, offering them compassion, offering them softness, not telling them to be gone, not telling them to go away, not telling them that they're not welcome. It's not necessarily that we want them to become dominant behaviors, but what we are trying to do is to bring the light of awareness to the way that we feel about ourselves, and to try to shift the way that we feel about ourselves into a place of acceptance, rather than trying to build walls within ourselves. And actually, by offering loving kindness in the same way, for example, that if we are looking after a young baby or a child, or we're looking after a small animal, or we're looking after a very, very delicate plant, we don't want to treat it harshly. If a child is crying, we don't want to tell it to go away and to figure itself out, and that we don't want crying children around. I mean, some of us may do that at times, but we know in our hearts that that's not really the right thing to do. Actually, what we want to do is to gather them up, to hold them gently, to offer them love, to allow them to express themselves so that energy can pass through them without resistance. The fascinating thing is that the more that we can bring this loving kind awareness and offer love to the parts of us that have gone unloved, not only do we come to know their nature more fully, but we reduce the resistance towards them, and we integrate ourselves more fully as a whole. If that is then combined with other practices of yoga where we are gently trying to condition new patterns of behavior that are generally more compassionate, generally more based on the principle of ahimsa, of non-violence, we find that on one hand we are offering this love and kindness to ourselves, which gradually over time allows us to shift our relationship with that behavior, and for that behavior in and of itself to begin to shift and to weaken in its tendency to appear. And therefore, actually, we notice that there is an evolution that arises as a result of this practice, rather than continuing to try to deny or to suppress the parts of ourselves that we find difficult to deal with, that others find difficult to deal with as well. And I should say that this is, as always, a long-term practice. There is benefit to all of the asana, to all of the meditation, to the breath practice and so on. But sometimes we really have to open ourselves up to what is called svadhyaya, this self-study, to really notice our patterns. And sometimes we have to sit with them. Sometimes we have to be with them in their raw state. And we can practice bringing this loving attention to them, so that gradually, as I've said, their energy softens, our expectations of ourselves soften, and gradually we begin to undo the knots that have been developed and created within us during this lifetime and perhaps in previous lifetimes, so that we gradually come to more and more of a state of acceptance, balance, and peace. This isn't easy work. It's not a solution that can work overnight, but it is something that if we commit to over time, if we have a steady technique that we can practice, it is something that really can help us to resolve some of these challenges that we also naturally face in our lives, and bring us to a place of wholeness, to a place of completeness. So thank you very much for listening as always, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Namaste.